For now, though, this is how the general sells his oil, direct from the ground and into these tankers.
The standard tanker size is about 200 barrels, and this is all delivered to the local markets in Kurdistan.
This is the biggest petrol station in the world.
It definitely would be the biggest one, and we are quite pleased with that.
And so, I mean, this is not normal, is it, to have tankers filling up directly from oil? So the oil is 3,000 metres below there, and the tankers are filling up directly from the well. It's extraordinary.
This is exactly correct.
Iraq's cheap to extract and easy to refine crude could make this nation rival Saudi Arabia as the world's top oil earner. Kurdistan's leaders want their new oil to be exported now.
And when we are ready to export, which we will be this year with Diano and Takhtak, probably we'll be able to produce about 100,000 to 200,000 barrels a day this year.
So exports will begin from this region by
Export will begin very soon in this region.
I'm really surprised if they think they can do this. If they can do this, then I suppose it means that the disintegration of the country, and they better seek a separate state.
It's not fragmentation. Why is fragmentation? It's actually we're doing 1 million barrels of new oil for our colleagues in the rest of Iraq to get 83–85% of it. What's wrong with that?
Oil means that Iraq is a staggeringly wealthy country, especially given the quadrupling in crude prices since the war 5 years ago. Even so, this is how most Iraqis buy their petrol today. The US admits that it's pressing Baghdad to pass its oil law to pump more oil and presumably help bring down world prices. Yet the impasse between the central and regional governments remains. Whoever it is that ends up controlling this nation's black gold, it can't yet be certain that Iraq's oil curse will one day turn into a blessing. Faisal Islam, Channel 4 News, Erbil.
Well, now, Issam Chalabi is Iraq's former oil minister, well, long ago, under President Saddam Hussein. But you're now an oil consultant, you know the world well, and you must know, presumably, that something like that plays into the destruction of Iraq as a unity state.
It's rather unfortunate that thanks to the Americans and some of these Kurdish officials, that oil has become not a unifying factor, but a dividing factor. And
so how do you ride it? What do you do?
What should be done is that this oil industry needs to be run completely by the central government with participation from the authorities in the regions and in the provinces, and not for every region to do it on his own, assumes his own interpretation of the Constitution. The guy said that their actions were legal and constitutional. Well, I say that his action is unconstitutional and illegal, and that was not the case, that everybody had seen it in the Constitution and in the draft law.
But you heard Dr. Hafed say right at the beginning that the central government is itself in trouble. How can you ask the central government to police the oil if it is itself weak and not well organized?
You see, this is a problem now, not only between the Kurds and the central government. Even inside the central government there is a lot of differences. So I think unless there is consensus in the central government, including the Kurds, there is no way to get out of this problem.
Well, Ambassador Rees, I know you say that your issues are obviously about economic transition in Baghdad, where you sit as the ambassador responsible for this quarter of the development of Iraq. But if you have a weak central government and it is charged with looking after the oil, and then you get the Kurds doing what they're doing, exploiting oil in their own territory, you've got trouble, haven't you?
Well, John, yes, we very much support a national hydrocarbon law. We think that a national hydrocarbon law that allows for a framework under which the Kurdish regional government can allocate acreage, but as part of a common policy for the development of the sector, for the benefit of all Iraqi peoples, is clearly in the country's interest. Legal certainty would lead to much more investment and lead to the growth that we want to see the country to have. And so we certainly share the idea that there should be a national law that allows for this kind of investment.
Right. Well, now, is that law about strengthening Iraqi oil, or is it in fact about making cheap oil for the outside world?
Iraqis are not against having a national oil law, but they are against the certain concepts that have been embedded in the draft oil law, whereby the dividing responsibilities will cause the fragmentation of the country, plus the fact that they want to follow certain models, production sharing models for discovered oil fields, whereby parts of the reserves will be given as a gift to the foreign companies. That cannot be allowed.
Well, now, Sir Hilary Sinnott was the administrator of southern Iraq immediately after the war. He joins us now from London. Sir Hilary, what do you make now? You must have been looking north from Basra, aware of the huge oil fields where you were. Did you see it as a unifying force, as something which had the potential to break the country up?
I think the real dangers about breakup of the country were not oil, certainly at the time I was there. It was more the differences between the communities and even within the communities. In the south where I was, the vast majority were Shia, and as we see now, the difficulties are in the south are about battles between three Shia factions. They're not so much about oil. For the long-term future of Iraq, of course, oil is important. But at the moment, the problem is more that there's real difficulty in being able to spend money. There's not a shortage of money. The difficulty is having an administrative structure which is able to spend this money at all. And that's a real problem. So it's the weakness of government at central and regional level.
In your book, you spell out the lengths to which you went to try and make some administrative structures. They've all collapsed. I mean, isn't this the problem, that the Western imposed structures, the Western sense of democracy that elected a government and the rest of it, have not borne the fruit that you all wanted it to?
Certainly, but actually the problem went earlier than that. I think the problem was one of false expectations based on hope and lack of analysis that somehow the Iraqi institutions themselves would hold. And in fact, that wasn't the case. They imploded. As a result, the coalition found itself trying to provide a government, which it was quite incapable of doing, until another Iraqi government was able to be formed. So the coalition failed in that, and it is a big challenge for Iraq, who've never had a democratic government in its whole life, to face up to these challenges now. So I think the aspirations of the coalition in those early days were far too ambitious.
Well, I just want to come to something which I think is germane to what he's just said, which is that the Channel 4 commissioned a poll, which we've been running through the week, to find out what Iraqis actually felt about what had been happening since the invasion. 4,000 people across the country questioned face to face. We asked them, how will Iraq be governed in the long term? 51% said Iraq will be run by a single national government. 14% said their country would be split into independent states, and 15% believed Iraq will be governed by semi-independent states. Well, that's interesting. Is that sort of reflected here? I mean, to what extent do you fear that oil is going to be a divisive issue that will break the country apart? Or to what extent do you agree with Sir Hilary Sinnott and say, well, actually, it's not the issue at the moment?
I think that oil is definitely an issue that will break the country apart. But more so, I think it's the discourse that the West and the international community has been building over the last few years in terms of the Shia and Sunni discourse. I think that's something that's been built up a lot more in the last 5 years than it might have historically been.
As a deliberate ploy by the outside?
I think so, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know what... yeah.
What are the rest of you? Do you feel that the outside world deliberately played the religious card in order to create... You all do?
Yes, yes, of course. I mean, the oil is the main...
But it was there beneath the surface throughout Saddam, wasn't it?
No, not really. No, not really.
We quote you figures.
No.
So why? How in 5 years can this thing have deteriorated to religious strife when 37% of your families were intermarried anyway? How's it got so bad?
Well, I think there are many, external factors that played into this sectarianism. Iraqis, on the whole, are not sectarian at all, and this is a new, introduction by regional and foreign.
Well, can that genie be got back into the bottle? Can you get religion back to where it was in a secular state?
If you ask all Iraqis,
if you go for really economic development in Iraq,
This is just, the phenomenon is apparent. Beneath that, it is the economic kind of fightings. That's why when you said about the fighting in the south, it is who is going to control the big oil wheels there? Who is going to control? So I think if we move to the, as I said, from the dispute regarding the constitution to economic development, after the reconciliation, the country will be settled down, and then we can move to 2008 election local government. From there, we will go to 2009 assembly election.